that you've written, in the drawings that you've made in school, in the articles which you write now, in the books that you write. Some of our judges have even been inventors. Like you remember Justice Mahendra Narayan. He had several inventions. One of his inventions was a three-part divider. You have part 1, part 2 and part 3 files in the High Court. He had one single file with 3 dividers and he had a patent for that. Anyone can be an intellectual property owner, and the future is not far when CVs in schools, curriculum vitae, will have a section on my intellectual property. And people will list their intellectual property and will be considered worthy with reference to how much of intellectual property they possess. Another trend, today the awareness has gone to the extent that the first play in the world on intellectual property called Brainchild was performed in India with Yashpal Sharma, the mainstream Bollywood actor, as a police officer who did not know the difference between intellectual property and physical, real property, or tangible property. It was a comedy, a roaring success. There was a seminar conducted on spirituality and intellectual property, where Sri Ravi Shankar explored with knowledge workers the connection between creativity and intellectual property and with spirituality. And he came to the conclusion that creativity has some connection with the spirituality, a great connection. Even now there is even a game called Analyst available, being played in schools, 2 schools of Delhi currently, which teaches school students intellectual property. This is the level of awareness. So my first point today, which I would like to make, is that the level of awareness in intellectual property is so huge that we are seeing radically different trends from what we had seen in the past. My second point is on some revolutions that are taking place in our courts, which we are sometimes aware of, sometimes not fully aware of. One, I would call the time revolution. What do I mean by that? I'm talking about the Delhi High Court and I'm talking about intellectual property. 5 years back, if you ask me or ask anybody, how long does an intellectual property case take in the High Court? They would say 5 to 10 years. Maybe 4 to 5 years. But it would be rare to say anything less than 2 years. Today, various changes have come about. The first change was that the Code of Civil Procedure was amended in July 2002. July 2002. Yes, 2002. And its effects started being felt after a couple of years. It took 2 or 3 years for the effects to be felt. The second was process changes brought about at the Delhi High Court. You can see that what used to take about 5 steps, they started streamlining. Delhi High Court has become an e-court. Some of the judges have big computers like Justice Bhatt, Justice Muralidhar, Justice Madhur Sevan. They've got big computers before them, and by June of next year, all the judges will. Which means lesser files, possibly no files. The screen will be split into 2 parts. One will be the court file and any pages, and the second will be their notes. They can cut, copy, paste. They can do Google searches. They can download. They can look at Manupatra. They can take paragraphs from here, and they can correct you if your citation is incorrect. And everything will be displayed on a screen in the courtroom. You are unique in the world. There is no court in the world that has that kind of a progress. I've had the opportunity to visit courts in many, many countries, but even in California, where you have the most advanced courts, you have a stray judge who might have a computer doing these kind of things. The next model will be to allow a laptop to be connected to the judge's computer, so that if you open page 9 of the plaint, the judge sees page 9 simultaneously, and there's a screen on which page 9 appears. So that's the kind of advancement on process changes. Then judges started to get into case management. They started to get on top of cases. They started to say, why 3 days? How many days are extra? Why have you filed it 4 days late? Synopsis, cut it down to 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages. Number of witnesses, cut them down. We don't want so many witnesses. The amount of hours on cross-examination, cut down. So they started to get on top of process or case management. And then came, in 2010, in intellectual property, 4 decisions of the Supreme Court, starting with TVS versus Bajaj, where the Supreme Court suggested that in intellectual property matters, although it was a patent case, but they said in intellectual property matters, an effort should be made by the judges to finish off the whole trial within 4 months from the date, from the beginning to the end.
How many?
4 months.
4 months.
When it came down to the High Court, a lot of judges, they kind of smirked. They said only the Supreme Court can do this. But in their heart to heart, judges were making the effort to change. And the result is that in 2010, the division bench number 4, DB Court, passed at least 15 orders of these 4 months trials. And this is the rapid trials. After that, there have been about a couple of Justice Bhatt decisions, DB4 decisions. There are maybe about 20 cases where 4 months trials have been ordered. And those evidences filed by cross-examination achieved by affidavits, cross-examination at the executive center, by local commissioners who are appointed, retired judges. There's a person who's taking out the dictation straight onto the computer. In 2 days, a foreign witness is completely, in a couple of hours, his cross-examination is completed. And in 4 months, you can realistically afford to finish an entire IP case. And sometimes the most complex case. Just to give you an example, even before the Supreme Court TVS versus Bajaj case gave us this 4-month trial concept, the Roche versus Cipla trial had started. And both the sides representing that case are in this room. You can confirm that case has finished, the trial has finished in 1 year. With at least 2 foreign witnesses and most of the other witnesses from outside Delhi. And 6 witnesses, the trial is finished in 1 year. Now it is for final disposal before the judge. So this is what I call the time revolution. The drawbacks, it has to go to other fields of law. Number 2, it has to go to other courts in the country. So the message has to be spread. Look at it this way. If you have a trial which can finish within 4 or 5 months, why do you need an interim injunction? Sometimes you don't even need to go for an interim injunction, because if you don't have an ex parte injunction, 2 adjournments takes you to 4 months. You can finish the whole case in 4 months. Second revolution is a remedies revolution. You have the most phenomenal remedies. There was a time when ex parte injunction and Anton Pillar orders, like appointment of commissioners who have the power to go search, seize, used to be about all that you could get at the interim stage. Then came Mariba injunctions, where you could seize the bank accounts. Then came Norwich Pharmacal orders, where you could discover not against the defendant but also third parties like customs. Customs could be asked to discover documents of export and shipping documents and things like that. Then came John Doe orders. John Doe orders were when you don't, there's a cricket match going on, or the Commonwealth Games, or the IPL cricket matches. In all of those, you didn't even know who would make Mickey Mouse t-shirts outside the stadium. If you waited for the day when it happens, by the time you get the address and contact details, the match is over, the goods are gone. How do you catch the person? Sometimes you can't take criminal action, and you don't want to take criminal action because you're talking about small traders. But what you can get is a John Doe order. An order in a civil action against unknown persons. And it first happened in 2002 June with 10 sports when the World Cup was going on. It was a 30-day intellectual property, only during the duration of the World Cup. What they did, they got a John Doe order and they took commissioner, the registrar of the Delhi High Court, all over the country. He went to a head end to a big cable operator in Bombay. The cable operator, of course, switched off the signal when he got to know. But this gentleman went and sat down in the control room and waited for complaints to come. Once a football match is going on and somebody switches it off, everybody is going to call and say, what's happened to my signal? What's happened to my signal? This gentleman would take the phone and say, what's your subscription number? When did you pay your fee? Etc. And he would write down all those details. That was all evidence that the signal had been broadcast and that violations were taking place. He brought that evidence back to the court, and as a result of those efforts, few parties were added, but 3,500 licenses were signed up for an intellectual property that had just a lifespan of 30 days. Similarly, the Commonwealth Games was even a bigger squeeze. The ride lasted only for 12 days. But before the Commonwealth Games started, we had got John Doe orders, and there were 37 parties were stopped from using the Commonwealth logo and the Commonwealth brands. So the whole concept of remedies, and then came, if you see from 1940s to 2005, there are roughly about 7,000 IP cases reported in the law reports. Indian IP cases. 7,000, not small. Of these 7,000, not one had reported damages in that period. There were 2 cases which were ex parte, where 1 lakh rupees damages had been granted, but those were ex parte cases. Not contested, the judge accepted everything with a plaintiff. But from 2005, on the 3rd of January, the Time magazine case was decided by the Delhi High Court. And the Delhi High Court said, Justice Chopra, Justice R.C. Chopra, that it is time that damages should be awarded in intellectual property matters because there is too much of pressure on our justice delivery system. And we need to ease that on the criminal justice delivery system. And we need to ease that and to make the civil justice delivery system more stronger and more providing a greater incentive. And because of that reason and various other reasons of creating the need for creating deterrence, from then to now, there have been about 65 decisions of the Delhi High Court where not only compensatory but punitive and exemplary damages have been granted. So today, visualize it like this. You can have, instead of taking so long, if the litigation will take so long, it will cost that much lesser, and you can get damages, and you can get all the internal reliefs that we spoke about. So the whole Delhi High Court, that's the reason why it has 70% of all IP enforcement. Not for any other special reason, but because it is kind of, this used to be the imitation belt, where you used to have the maximum copying was in North India, I guess because of the North Indian entrepreneurship. But because of that, the skills to combat piracy and counterfeiting also grew here. And because of the way the judges have kind of reacted to that, by building up a knowledge base, by building up a culture, that is why 70% of all IP enforcement is in India. So these are the 2 broad trends, the time revolution and the remedies revolution, which I wanted to just touch on. Let me touch on 4 more areas and then I'm finished. First, in the world, due to the internet, there is a digital revolution. And it is a new world from what we knew many years ago. In the past, if you had a book, if you took a photocopy of the book, it would be weaker than the first. You took the 100th photocopy, it would be so dim that you had to reject it. Today, on the internet, you make a copy. The 1 millionth copy is exactly the same as your first copy. First. Second, it's a giant copying machine. In the real world, if one person made something like a book publisher, then they needed a retailer to sell them. And the acts of publishing and retailing were 2 separate acts. On the internet, so there was primary infringement for one under the copyright laws, and a secondary or a lesser liability, secondary infringement for the seller of the work. On the internet, 1 click and you publish and you sell. Because if you send somebody, you make copies yourself and you retail. So the distinction between primary and secondary infringement are blurred. Also, in the real world, in the physical